Hi everyone, Eloise Blue here today for my favourite things, and I'm so excited to be guest designing for MFT this month. So I have a ton of the brand new January release here, and I'm going to be making 3 separate window cards today since I wanted to show off as much of the new product as possible and create as many cards as I could for you. So this is going to be quite a long video, but I really hope you guys enjoy it. So for my first card, I'm going to start off with the Raving Raccoons stamp set. So I just went ahead and stamped that with Copic friendly ink onto some Nina Silhouette cardstock, and I'm going to quickly colour in 2 of these raccoon images. So I'm first starting off with my darkest tone, which is E79, and I'm just going on where I think the darkest areas of the image would be. So I'm colouring in the top of his head, his eyes, his ears, bits of his tail, and then I'm just going, generally I'm adding my shading on the left hand side of the image since that's just what I feel like works for me and what looks the best with my shading, but I am definitely no expert, so I just sort of go with the flow. And so once I've finished adding in my darkest shade, I can move on to colouring in my medium shade. So for my medium shade, I'm going to be using E47, and I'm just going to blend out that E79 a little bit. Now, these colours were kind of close together, so when I added them on at first, they sort of seemed too similar, but I feel like when they were drying back a little bit, were a little bit more like defined, and so you could definitely see like the gradient of shading between all 3 of the colours that I'm using for my images. So I'm just blending out that E79 a little bit further into the image, and then I'm going to go in with my lightest shade, which is E44. And so this is just going to lighten up the entire image, and so I am just blending out the rest of the colour that I used into the rest of the image and just making sure that I go over what I previously coloured, just so all of those colours blend together quite nicely, and so you sort of get like a seamless, nice gradient and transition. So once I've gone ahead and finished colouring in with the lightest shade, I did sometimes get out of the lines and things, but I will fix those up later on. So once I finished up colouring in with my lightest shade, I'm going to move on to colouring in like the rest of their faces and on their tails and their hands and things. So I'm just going to be using some lighter E40s for that. So I've just started off with E43 and just going in again where I think the darkest areas would be. I'm not too particular with this. I just sort of, as I said before, just sort of go with the flow and see where I think the colour would be best placed, but I'm definitely no expert. Then I'm going in with E42 and I'm blending out that E43 a little bit further into each of the parts of the image. Then I'm finishing off completely with E40, and again this is just going to lighten up the whole image and just finish off that nice transition of colour there and create a really gorgeous gradient. So then I'm just going to move on to colouring in the tops and things. So for the girl's top, I'm using some RV colours. So I'm using RV09 as my darkest, RV25 as my mid-tone, and RV13 as my lightest tone. Then I'm colouring in the little boy's shirt with some YG colours, so YG17 is my darkest, then moving on to YG23 and then using YG21 as my lightest shade. And then for the itsy bitsy details on the girl, I'm using some BG, so I'm using BG49 as my darkest, blending that out a little bit with my BG23 and then blending that all together with my BG11. And I'm using these 3 colours in particular because they're going to work well with my background and the rest of my card. Then for their ears, I'm just using R22 and RV10. Then I'm just using the coordinating dies and I'm cutting them out using my Big Shot machine. Now I need to work on my window piece for my card, so I've pulled out the hearts in a row vertical dies and I've just cut off this trio of hearts that are in a row. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut this out 3 times of my watercolor cardstock. So I'm just going to use a ruler and sort of just get it lined up so it's all like even at the top. So I'm just lining up a ruler and then I'm pressing that die up to the top of the ruler, and then I can adhere that down with some washi tape. And I do also measure to make sure that it is centered on my card as well, and I did pretty well with eyeballing that, but you can use a ruler to make sure that it's directly in the center as well. So once I've gone ahead and lined that up, I'm just going to run that through my big shot machine and then repeat that 2 more times on either side. And so this is going to be my window sort of piece for my card, and I'm going to create little shaker pockets. So that's sort of how the design's going to look, and I'm just going to move on to ink blending that panel. So I've just pulled out some Distress ink, some Tumbled Glass and Salty Ocean, but you can use whatever inks you own. I just love Distress inks. So I'm going to go ahead and first colour on some Tumbled Glass at the top of my panel, just sort of fading that down into white into the center. And once I've added some Tumbled Glass on there, I'm going to go in with Salty Ocean and just blend that down further, just to sort of create like a darker effect and more of a gradient. So then once I finish with the blue, I'm going to move on to the green. So I'm using some Twisted Citron and just blending at the bottom first, fading up into white also. I didn't want the blue and the green to meet, that's why I just wanted to fade it out into white. Then I'm coming in with some Mowed Lawn and finishing that off, adding a little bit of darkness on the bottom as well. Then to give my panel a little extra, I'm just going to flick it with some water. This is just the nozzle out of my Distress sprayer tool, but a paintbrush or anything would work as well. Then I'm just going to pick up that excess water with a paper towel and dry it off with a heat tool. Then I've got another piece of white cardstock here, and this is going to go behind my little shaker window. So I'm just starting off with some spun sugar and ink blending that at the all over this panel, sort of fading up to white at the very tippity top though. Then I'm coming in with picked raspberry and I'm adding some darker colour onto the bottom of my panel, then going back in with spun sugar just to sort of blend that out a little bit. This piece doesn't have to be perfect since majority of it is going to be covered up, but I did want there to be a nice gradient. Now I'm adding a little bit of adhesive onto the back of this hearts panel that I die cut earlier, and I'm just going all around those hearts because I'm going to go ahead and add a piece of acetate directly over the back of this. So I just cut that down and just stuck it on there. And then I'm going to go ahead and go around all of those hearts with some foam tape. So just one layer of foam tape, and then I can fill up some of these hearts with some sequins. So I'm using the Sweetheart mix from Pretty Pink Posh and some Spring Blooms mix as well, and I'm just going to go ahead and sort of fill these cavities with a few of the sequins from each mix. So what I was sort of going for here is I wanted to create like an X with the sequins, and then I wanted the remaining hearts to be like an O, so like XO. I just thought that would be sort of cute, and so that's what I was sort of going for there. So once I've gone ahead and filled in each of these cavities with sequins, I'm going to peel off the adhesive backers and then adhere my pink Distress ink blended piece over top. So I'm making sure that the light goes at the top and the darker at the bottom because that's just how I like my gradients to go. So once I've adhered this down, you can see that when I flip it over, it's really cool because it's all dark on the bottom and really light on the top. And those sequins in those windows just make it super fun. So now that I've gone ahead and done that, I just went ahead and I'm going to adhere my 2 little raccoons onto the bottom left hand side of my card, just using a little bit more foam tape. And then for the sentiment, I just white heat embossed on a piece of black cardstock, You Stole My Heart, and then I'm going to use the Hearts in a Row vertical die cuts once again to use one of the little banner shapes to die cut that out since it fits absolutely perfectly in there. So once I've gone ahead and done that, I just went ahead and foam mounted that onto my card as well. So that finishes up my first window card. It's a little sequin window card, and now I'm going to move on to the second card I'm going to make. So for my second card, I'm going to create another window design, and this time it's going to sort of carry on into the inside of the card. So I'm using the Full of Heart dies as well as the From the Heart stamp set, and this time I'm going to have like a window card that goes all the way through to the inside of the card, but it's also going to carry on to the inside of the card, if that makes sense. So it's sort of going to be like pretty blank on the front, but it's going to be nice and colourful on the inside of the card. So I think it's a really fun design. So I first went ahead and cut down a card base to 4 inches wide by 11 inches long, and then scored it at 5.5 inches. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut this full of heart dies out of the front of it. So I made sure I opened up my card base, and I'm just going to run that through my Big Shot machine. And so this is now the card base. It's not very sturdy, so I'm going to do something to that later on, but this is basically the design I was going for. So once I've gone ahead and cut the card base, I'm going to take a piece of acetate. This is just a thin piece of transparency, since that's all that I could get to run through my Big Shot machine, and I'm going to use this as a stencil. So this die is really great for creating your own stencil. Even though there is a stencil exactly like this die in the shop, I just wanted to make my own. So I'm just going to go ahead and adhere down my card base onto my work surface with a little bit of washi tape, just because I know that won't tear my cardstock. And then I'm going to lay over my stencil as well, so I can get ink blending. So once I've gone ahead and laid my stencil over the top and it's not going to go anywhere, I pulled out 5 colours of Distress ink, and I'm going to create another sort of gradient. So I'm using quite a few like warm tones here, but you could definitely change it up for cool tones or your favourite colour scheme if you like. Distress inks are really great for blending into each other, but again, you can use whatever inks you like. MFT inks would work perfectly for this as well. So I used Pick Raspberry on the bottom, then Abandoned Coral, Ripe Persimmon, and then I'm using Spiced Marmalade, and then finishing off with Mustard Seed at the very top. And so once that is all blended into each other, I can remove the mask, and you can see that that coloured design has gone into the inside of the card. So the front of the card is still a stark white, but then you've got all of the colour on the inside, which I just think it sort of just adds a little bit extra to a design, and you can easily write your message to your loved one on the back of this card, and that would work just as fine. So because this card was a little bit, it wasn't really sturdy, I decided to cut another cover die piece out of another piece of white cardstock. So I just used the same full of heart dies and just cut that out of an additional white piece of cardstock cut to the same size, added some foam tape on the back, and then added it to the front of the card. And I also think this looks much better because it adds a little bit of dimension to the card, and I don't know, it just sort of did give it a bit more weight so it would stand up better as well. So for my sentiment, I just white heat embossed some sentiments from the stamp set, and it just reads, "Sending some love every single day in every single way," and I just thought that would be really fun. I really love this stamp set because a lot of the sentiments can be stacked like this with each other, which I just think is really fun. It sort of gives your sentiment a little bit more to it, I guess, rather than just having like one simple sentiment. It's sort of like a little, well, not really like a little poem, but it's sort of just gives a little bit extra to it and makes it super fun and sweet. So I'm just going to go ahead and add some foam tape onto the back of these pieces and then adhere onto the front of my card. So I sort of adhered it in a different way because I wanted there to be like a shorter sentiment piece, a longer piece, and another shorter piece. So it reads a little bit differently, but I still think it makes just as much sense as before, and I think it's still just as sweet. So then to cover up the foam adhesive on the middle of the card, I just added some more black strips on the inside so it would look all perfect. So that finishes up my second card, a super simple card, and now let's move on to the third and final card. So for my final card, I'm going to be using the Brushstroke Blooms stamp set, as well as the Stitched Heart Peekaboo window dies, which is the free with 60 this month, as well as the Heart Maze shapes and from the Heart stamp set again as well. So to stamp out these Brushstroke Blooms, I really wanted to go with the watercolor feel that they already have. So I'm going to be stamping with Distress inks and sort of making it look like I watercolored them myself. So I've just taken an acrylic block and one of the largest floral base images. I just ran over that image with an eraser to make the ink stick a little better. Then I'm using Tattered Rose Distress Ink to ink up my stamp, and then off to the side I'm just spraying it a couple of times with a water spritzer bottle. I didn't show that on camera since everything would have gotten wet, but I basically just sprayed it twice, waited for the water to pool up on the stamp, and then stamped down, and you'll see that you sort of get like a watercolor effect. Now I sprayed a bit too much water on this first go, so I'm just tapping the back of the cardstock to get that water to move around, and I also did go in with a bit of a damp brush as well, just to spread out that darkest color so it wouldn't like blob in one area. But I really love this look that you get with stamping with distress inks, because like you just get that sort of like watercolor feel, and it looks like you painted these flowers yourself, even though the stamp did all the work. But it's sort of just, I don't know, it gives it a different look every time, which I think is really fun. So I've just repeated the same process for the second flower that I stamped down in spun sugar, and this one didn't stamp as like with as much water on there, so again I just took my paintbrush in and sort of spread out that splotchy color a little bit more just to make it look more watercolored. Then I took one of the smaller flower images and stamped it down with milled lavender, and so again I'm just dipping in my paintbrush into some water and spreading out that color, make it look a little bit more watercolored, just because I didn't add as much water on there as well. Now it's time to stamp the center of the images, so I'm using some worn lipstick on top of the Tattered Rose stamped image, and then again just spreading that out a little bit just to fade it and sort of blend it, since those colors are very different, but I sort of liked the two of them together, but I just knew they wouldn't blend into each other as well as I was hoping for. So I just went ahead and did that with a paintbrush, and then for the spun sugar flower, I'm going to use some picked raspberry distress ink to stamp in the center. So again, just inking it up like I normally would any image, and then just spraying it with a bit of water and stamping it down, then taking my wet paintbrush and sort of blending that color out a little bit, just so it wouldn't be so like perfect and it does really look like you watercolored it. That's something I love to do with solid images. But if you don't want to stamp with the distress inks, I mean, you can totally do this just with normal inks, and you're going to get a great effect, since these images are sort of more imperfect and look like watercolored images anyway. So then for the center of the purple flower, I just used Victorian Velvet and just did the same technique. So once all of my images are done, I just went ahead and did the same thing for the leaves as well, just using some cracked pistachio and peacock feathers ink, and then I just went ahead and dried those off with a heat tool and used the quinine dyes to cut them out. Next up, I am creating sort of like my maze window piece that's going to be sort of like the focal point of this card. So I'm just using the stitched heart window here and just die cutting that out of a piece of watercolor cardstock, and then I just ink blended the bottom of that paper with some spun sugar and picked raspberry ink as well. So and then I just sprayed that with some water and then picked that up with a paper towel and heat set that. And then I'm going to go ahead and line up this panel again to cut out this heart window from the card base. So I just cut another 4" by 11 piece of cardstock, scored it at 5.5, and then I'm just lining up that heart over the top of my previously cut panel and just running that through my Big Shot machine to make sure it cuts in the same spot. Then I need to add a couple of pieces of acetate. So there are heart window pieces that you can get for these mazes to fit into, but I didn't have any. So I just added some acetate on there, added some spray adhesive on the back of the maze, adhered over the acetate, and that works just as well. So then I'm using some gold shimmer seed beads from Pretty Pink Posh as my little maze pieces, just because I really wanted there to be a touch of gold in this card for the color scheme. So that's why I went ahead and did that. And I also added a double layer of foam tape around the entire panel, so around that heart and then all around the card base, and then I'm going to line up my top panel that has the ink blending on it over top of my heart and then just adhering that down. And you can see that this creates the perfect like little shaker maze piece that you can see on the outside and on the inside of the card as well, which is super fun. So now that basically my card is complete, I just need to add on my images that I stamped and die cut earlier. So I just created them in a little cluster at the bottom left hand side of the heart, and I'm just going to adhere those down with some foam tape. Then for the sentiment, I just used some grey cardstock that I added a little bit of pumice stone distressing blending to the bottom of the strip. And then I'm using the You Wow My Heart sentiment from the stamp set, and I just gold heat embossed that onto the strip of grey cardstock. This is why I wanted to use those gold shimmer beads, because I wanted to incorporate a gold embossed sentiment. I just sort of felt like that would have fitted a little bit better. So I just foam mounted that onto the front of my card, and that finishes up my third card. So I really hope you enjoyed my video today. I know it was a very long video, but I just wanted to show as many of the brand new products as I could and create as many cards for you guys as inspiration. So these are all 3 of the cards that I made today. I hope you enjoyed. These are some great window cards for any Valentine's Day or for any loved one. So I just wanted to thank you guys again for watching, and thank you very much to MFT for having me as a video guest designer. I'm so honored and I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so grateful for you having me. So thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.